Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bushaga, and I'm your host today on the Shout Show. And today I'm actually incredibly thrilled and privileged to have with me here Bart Decrem. And Bart here, as you guys know, has done so many incredible things. Just to give you a little bit of a short explanation, short bio about him. Bart Decrem was the founder and CEO of Tapulous, one of the earliest iPhone startups known for the Tap Tap Revenge series, which was later acquired by the Walt Disney Company. He was the senior vice president and general manager for mobile games at the Walt Disney Company. I'm hoping to get into a little bit about that later. It's not every day I have the honor to learn from someone who is from Disney. And of course, besides that, his other ventures include his time at Mozilla, later at Flock. And Bart has also worked on over 25 number one App Store hits, including Temple Run, Where's My Water, and many more. Bart was also recognized as one of the 50 most creative people in business in 2009 by Fast Company, and one of the 10 most creative people in the music biz by Fast Company, too. Today, he's the founder and CEO of The Hobby, and his latest venture, Amplify, aims to amplify music for rising artists. And I'm sure a lot more too coming along with that. So I guess we'll take it a little bit unraveling his life's journey. And later on, I'm hoping to get into some of the questions you guys, our viewers, have asked into getting to the industry. But before that, Bart, how are you doing today? How are you feeling?
Good. It's a beautiful morning in California. We're in the middle of a heat wave, so it's a little stuffy, but still beautiful.
Awesome. I'm glad to have the time here to learn a little bit from you. And I was hoping if we could perhaps rewind the clock a little bit to your time in Stanford and towards 2008 through 2010 when everything really kicked off. Could you perhaps color in a little bit about those early days in your career for us?
Yes, absolutely. One addition to my background, the hobby was a set of projects that I winded down maybe a year or two ago. And right now I'm at Mozilla. I'm back at Mozilla where I'm doing a number of innovation projects, most, most mostly a thing called Mozilla Builders, where we have an incubator where we are working with college
Right.
students and young entrepreneurs that have exciting ideas for building a better internet. Um, but to answer your question, yeah, I've always liked building stuff. If we have to rewind the clock all the way, it'd be when I was 12 years old, when I started working in what was then called pirate radio back in Belgium. Only the government was allowed to have access to the airwaves, and we built, there was a thing called Radio Carolina where they had a ship on the North Sea, and out of that came pirate radio. And I worked as a DJ and created a magazine at the age of 12 and 13 for an early underground pirate radio station, and haven't stopped building and creating things since.
Do you get tired at all? Like you're constantly evolving from one thing to another. I would imagine that and at sometimes it must have occurred to you, hey, where's the ending? Or is there no ending? And you just love the process.
Yeah, I figured out at some point, growing up in Belgium, I never knew what I wanted to do. I remember looking at the booklets for the universities and going like, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me. Ended up studying political science. And then I came to Palo Alto to study law.
Right.
And the only reason I picked law is that seemed like an interesting bunch of stuff to study, and it was right here in Palo Alto, and I was very excited about Steve Jobs and this idea of the Macintosh and the lure of technology. And so it took me a little while to figure out that what I like doing is I like to build things, and it aligns a little bit with my personality type. I'm high energy, I get bored easily, I'm fairly resilient, it's okay when things fail. So there's a set of personality traits that align pretty well with being an entrepreneur. Didn't really know all that until, I don't know, until I'd done two or three different things and started recognizing the pattern.
Mm-hmm. And you're also not too afraid of making big changes, especially from your time in Belgium and then to the
Yeah.
US and South Korea. And how how is making changes and staying resilient like part of your process? Is this something that comes natural to you, or is this
Yeah,
something that you work really hard on?
Yeah, I don't know. One of the things we realize is that we tell ourselves these stories about ourselves and who we are and what kind of person we are, and then sometimes they map to what the rest of the world sees, and sometimes it's just you that's seeing it. You might be crazy, but as I think about myself, I like to think that I'm very curious and that I like to learn new things. So the flip side to all that is that I don't go super deep and I don't tend to stick with things super long, right? So like I look at the career of many remarkable people and their life's journey feels like it's one body of work and it gets deeper and deeper. Steve Jobs, for example, right? So I don't think I'm ever going to be able to be deep like that, but I'm always learning things and I'm always curious and I'm always enjoying and all in on what I'm doing. And I do think it adds up over time. So for example, with Tap Tap Revenge, I spent a fair amount of time in the music industry, and it brought me back to my days as a DJ and in radio.
Yep.
And so I wanted to DJ, and then that got me to wanting to produce electronic music. And what I'm learning from that, it's very hard because I'm middle aged and I'm mechanical. Like it's let's make a song. Well, I don't have an idea for a song. I must find a melody. I have this way of thinking about creating something. And what I'm learning as I'm trying to create electronic music is I'm learning to relax and touch a button. And with synthesizers, you literally can do that, right? Touch a button and watch what happens and then play around and then give it time. And after 20, 30 minutes, something interesting starts happening. And that whole process is something that's a part of my brain that's been very underdeveloped. But now I'm learning how to do that. And so now I can surf a little bit better because I'm sort of reacting to the waves as opposed to, I need to catch 10 waves today, which is sort of how I come at it normally. And so I think all of these things I'm picking up along the way, hopefully they make me a more fulfilled version of myself. But maybe as I then go back to work, the work gets richer and more creative, and I'm drawing from that into what I do next.
Right. And I think it's very interesting that the fact that it's not like how you mentioned, it's not just one thing throughout the entire life's career, but it's more of little things along the way. And those things actually end up helping much later, I would imagine. For instance, your time as a DJ later on when you were going on to build Amplify, when you were going
Yeah.
on to get into the Disney world, I would imagine those things really jumped in and helped you in that. What do you think?
Yeah, I was watching, I think it's the Steve Jobs commencement speech from Stanford. I think
Right.
it was in 2012. I
Yep.
was watching it just a few weeks ago, and he talks about that you can't connect the dots forward, you can only connect them
Yep.
backward.
That
And
was a very inspirational one.
yeah, well, that for me, that really resonated, which is to say, I don't think it means do whatever, but do you have some sort of an internal guide of what you do and why you do it? And then do you trust yourself mostly to take the next step and do the next thing that is right? And when you look back, there'll be connective tissue, right? So sometimes I talk to my father and I'm like, here we are. I'm doing music all over again. It's like I've come full circle. So sometimes I look at my life and I'm like, I'm doing the same stuff in 20 years again. So there's some of that, but I think of it as connecting the dots backward. And for me, it is I like to build things, and I like to build things that are worth building. Sometimes because they're nonprofit and they're literally charitable, and sometimes because they're for profit, but they're interesting, they're creative, they add joy to the world, they help people achieve their dreams, whatever the thing is. And you come across, you learn things and you meet people and you take that along with you, and that becomes your body of work.
Gotcha. Awesome. Speaking about building things, I kind of want to ask this one question our viewers have been asking a lot on the time you built Tap Tap Revenge with Nate. I'm sure you get asked about this a lot, but I want to switch gears and ask a slightly different question. Were there any, mistakes that you've made that you really learned from the entire experience? Like,
Yeah. So Right. So one of my favorite books on entrepreneurship is by Ed Catmull, the co-founder of Pixar, and I think the book is called Creativity Inc. And it talks about the success of Pixar, and he goes, so much of it was success, what was luck, and timing. And as we tell ourselves the story of our success, there's this sort of like this hero's journey. But in reality, if we're honest about it, when we do succeed, a lot of it has to do with timing and luck, and that's a big thing with tap revenge. To give one example of that, I thought the game had sort of run its course. We were maybe about a month into the launch. So I think the App Store launched in June 2007 or June 2008, and it went to number 1, and then a month or two later, by August, I think we're like number 75, and at the time, if you dropped out of the top 100, then discovery became really, really a problem. So you could see the thing trending down, and we were going to get back to our original vision of the kinds of apps we wanted to build. And then what happened is we got a call from Apple, and they wanted to get a special build of the game for what became the iPod Touch. And what ended up happening is that I think a lot of it had to do with the color scheme and the geometry of the game. The lanes in Tap Tap Revenge, they're like a triangle. And the colors, I believe, are red and green and blue.
Yep.
The whole thing kind of looks like a Christmas tree. And the holiday season was coming up. And Apple did their big fall launch in September or October of 2008. And they introduced the iPod Touch. And I think they picked Tap Tap Revenge to be part of the launch materials for that, because it looked like a holiday-themed game that kind of reminded you of a Christmas tree, but it wasn't a Christmas tree. And all of that marketing brought the game all the way back to number 1 on the App Store, and then we doubled down on it, and that became the company. It's because it was red and green and blue, and it was kind of a triangle, and Steve Jobs liked that color combination for what they were trying to signal with their launch campaign. So that's pure luck, right? So that's one example of it. The second example of it is that the company we set out to build, we were trying to build a mobile social network. And the theory that we had in 2007 when the iPhone first came out and going into the App Store launch was there's going to be these tentpole apps that are going to connect to a common social backend. So what if we have a photo sharing app and an address book app and a chat app, and then they all use the same social network in the backend? And we started building that. And then Tap Tap Revenge was the side project. We did it because I'd met the developer, and we had the opportunity, we liked the game, so we put it out. It took over the company. And so in retrospect, we built a very successful game and a very successful company. But you look back on the opportunity now, and when we launched, there were literally 502 apps, I believe, on that first day on the App Store versus, is it 1.5 million now, right, today? And so we built the smaller company. And so if you wanted to be critical, you'd say, hey, Bart, one of the biggest missed opportunities in your career is that you had the opportunity and you had millions of people, like somewhere north of 10% of all iPhone users were on your social network. And you didn't really execute against that idea. You executed against something much smaller, a game that ended up being a V1 game that wasn't a game in the same way that Fortnite, etc., have become these huge platforms and tremendous businesses over time, right? So one could say that the success of TapTap stopped us from pursuing what could have been a much bigger success.
Indeed.
I don't know. I don't live in that alternate universe.
It's also pretty interesting, the fact that you went into developing a social platform, and TapTap came as a byproduct of it, right? And then all of a sudden that started gaining traction, and you decided to double down on that instead of focusing on the first part. So is that like a common theme, looking at what really works and instantly doubling down on that rather than focusing on what you originally started out with?
For me, the common theme is, you have to be humble. When you hear the story of how Steve Jobs built Apple or Mark Zuckerberg built Facebook, there are these stories that feel like they are inevitable, right? And I have this idea in the back of my head of like, it'd be great to do a podcast series that is all the other people that looked at the beginning just like Mark Zuckerberg. They were smart and clever and hardworking, and then their idea didn't go anywhere, right? Because I think there's probably 50 of those, right, that started at the same time Facebook started. And so you don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. At Disney, we use the word hit-driven business, right? Anything in consumer, it's a hit-driven business, whether it be music or a movie or a social app or a game or another consumer app. It has to connect with the culture. Its timing has to be right. It has to find an initial set of users that react to a piece of it that then spread the word to others. You don't know. And so you're always making imperfect decisions with imperfect information and knowledge, and you can't tell the future. And depending on your biases and your specific circumstances, you decide to double down and go bold and choose the left fork in the road, or you decide to do something a little bit more conservative and more scrappy, the right fork in the road. And we took the right fork in the road and it worked out quite well. But maybe if we'd taken the left fork, there would have been a bigger bounty there. You don't know. You don't get to do it over. I think as an entrepreneur, you have to be comfortable that you're making choices, and then you'll find out later if it was a decent choice or not.
Hmm. And it's not like you can find out what happened on the other side too. It's kind of like you mentioned, a lifelong game of one process after the next.
Well, I have in my whole career, I have one counterexample of that, which is the first startup I was part of. We set out to make a Linux easy to use. It was a company called Easel.
Yep.
We had, of all the startups I've been part of, still the most amazing group of people I've ever worked with. Andy Hertzfeld built the original Macintosh operating system with Steve Jobs. Darren Adler, Mark Segovia, John Sullivan. I think these guys run like half of Apple today, and so it's this amazing group of people where we built this company, and we tried to make Linux easy to use, and we failed. And at the same time, two guys, Nat Friedman and Miguel de Casa, started a company with the exact same mission, and their company was called Helix Code. It became Simian. It sold to Novell. Then they started another company, sold to Microsoft. Nat now runs GitHub. He's the CEO of GitHub at Microsoft. And I was like, wow, here we were with this beautiful team and grand vision. And here was another team with the same general vision, much more humble beginnings. And they were trying to make Linux easy to use too. And Linux never broke through as a consumer desktop environment, but they were able to build a successful company and we were not. So that's the one time in my career where I was like, no, there was an A/B test and there was another I started at the same time and he did okay and we failed. So I know we did something wrong there.
Did you ever find out what was wrong? Because it's kind of the same mission. Was it down to creativity? Was that the deciding factor in the end? How easy they managed to do it?
I met, there's this investor I really look up to in Silicon Valley. His name is Vivek Ranadev. He's one of the investors in the Sacramento Kings right now. He's done a bunch of other really remarkable things in his career. And in one of my startups, I said, hey, Vivek, you keep running into you and you keep saying all these nice things, but you're never investing in me. And he looked at me and he goes like, well, you're hungry, but you're not starving. And I like to invest in people that are starving. And I think, it sounds a little harsh to put it that way, but I think there's a lot of truth in there. I think wisdom and connections and resources and a bold vision, all of that stuff matters. But I think what matters even more is just not having a plan B and working hard and having great urgency and doing whatever it takes. And I actually think Simian just had more of that. They didn't have all the fancy stuff that we had, but they really wanted to succeed very badly. We wanted to succeed, but not as badly as them.
Gotcha. Stay hungry and don't have a plan B. Focus hard on plan A. Keep going on.
It's a hard thing to say to people because privilege comes into it too, right? There's this thing where we all go around and say, follow your dreams. And then sometimes I say, well, except that a lot of people have dreams that aren't going to work out. If your dream is to be a basketball player, statistics are against you, right? So the privilege part of it comes in where you say, well, I come from a middle-class background, and if I fail, my family would be there to pick me up. A lot of people can't afford to fail in the way that I was privileged to have that opportunity and to have that freedom, right? So as we think about be all in and don't have a plan B, you have to then say, well, do you have to, is that actually realistic for you? And if not, how do you map your plan versus your ability and versus the risks that you're able to tolerate? Because I think most people are not able to tolerate infinite risk. It can be very traumatic for your family if you're without a job and without money, right? So as we think about what are we going to do, you sort of have to think about what kind of thing am I building here? What's the scope of my ambition and how big can this get? And what are the odds of it getting that big? And how long will it take? And what kind of resources, how many people, what kind of money, what kind of challenge I'm going to have to overcome? And how does that map against where I am in life? My ability to line all that stuff up and to make it all the way through the journey. And so that divergence is a good example where we did something smaller that had a shorter time horizon, shorter capital requirements, a different kind of team, and we were able to execute against that opportunity. And I'm not sure at all that we would have been able to take the same company and point it in a whole different direction.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Factoring all the odds in, especially with origins and beginnings too.
I think doing stuff you love is great.
Yeah.
But you also got to map it against what do I need to achieve, and when can I afford to fail, to take a step sideways and start over again next year if I need to, etc.
Well, yep, absolutely. Harsh reality of life, though. Focus on what you love, but at the same time, everything comes into play. Well, speaking about interesting people, but you mentioned quite a few names there, Andy and a few others. One person that you really got to spend a lot of time with was Tim at the time in Disney. How was it like spending some time in Disney, and how was it like working with so many incredible people? Was there something that particularly struck out that you learned through, and maybe you could share an example of it?
Yeah, I loved working at the Walt Disney Company. It's the only large company I've ever worked at. I think I was very fortunate in that at Disney, a lot of the business units, they have dual leadership, or they have one or the other, but they sometimes have creative leaders, and then they sometimes have business leaders, and then sometimes they have both. Like at Pixar, they had one of each, right? And they were running the business together. And the company treated me as a creative leader. They looked at me and they said, oh, you're not an MBA type. You're not a professional manager. You're a creator, in the same way that a movie director is a creator. And they allowed for that. And at Disney, those kind of leaders in general received as much respect and power as people with an MBA or with a business background. So it was an environment where I felt really valued. More importantly, it was really amazing to watch the culture and history and how people related to the brand and what Disney meant for so many people. And so it allows you to say, oh, wow, over the course of 100 years, a very small number of companies mean something to a group of people. They have emotional resonance. They stand for something. And it's amazing when you watch the power of that thing, right? And very practically, the quality of the experiences are how people react when you say to them that you went to Club 33 or you work at the Walt Disney Company. Also, what happens when you put out a game with a Disney character and it shoots to number one of the. I mean, there's a reason I got 25 number one hits, right? A lot of them when I was at Disney, everything we put out with a Disney character would go straight to number one on the App Store, right? So you realize the power of that. And then the second half was that Bob Iger, who until very recently was the CEO, and he's back now in I don't know if it's temporary or permanent role, but Bob was, I think, an exceptional leader at Disney. And then one of the things that I heard him say, which just in the last few weeks I found out actually came from Steve Jobs, was this idea of brand deposits and brand withdrawals. And this idea that whatever you do, it's either going to add to what your brand stands for, or it's going to detract from that. And every now and then you need to do something that's going to be bad for the brand, where you're, marketing a T-shirt at Walmart and it's a little low quality, whatever that thing is that you're doing, that's not adding to the aspiration, to the dream that people have when they think about Disney. That's okay, but you can't do too many of those without doing brand deposits. You have to invest in what the brand stands for. That's a very important concept. I think you got it from Steve Jobs at Apple. I think great companies, they are really thoughtful and deliberate, and they understand that. I try to do that in my career. And then finally, working with Tim Fitzrandolph in my career, I've been very fortunate that I've gotten to work with several really exceptional people. And then one of them was Tim at Disney. Another one was Ben Goodger at Mozilla on the Firefox 1.0 launch. Those are exceptional people with tremendous leadership skills and charisma, and more importantly, sort of clarity of vision of what they're trying to ship. And when we all get out of the way and let them do that work, then you end up with Firefox 1 or with Where's My Water. And for me, that model of creating product, that's what I find the most exciting in my career. And I hope I'll have the opportunity to work with somebody like that again in my career and watch them build exceptional products and experiences, and the power of that and the impact that stuff makes. It's so exciting.
I can imagine. Building on the power and building on the brand part there, was it particularly stressful knowing that you had so much of brand power with you, and the fact that whatever app you put out there, it's definitely going to get a high reception? Was it particularly stressful to get everything right, to get everything going? Or was it more iterative? You kept improving time and time again?
Well, my boss when I was at Disney was a guy named John Pleasance. He's a good friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And then after I left, he said, Bart, building Tesla or building Tap Tap Revenge, it's the same amount of work because you're going to give it everything you have. So make sure you dream big enough in life, which I think is very true. But the way that answers your question is no, because whatever work I'm doing, I'm really committed to. And so whether it's something really tiny that I'm doing on my own and that doesn't have any users yet, or whether it's a big launch for the Mozilla, for the Disney Corporation, my power is that I take my work seriously. And so you're giving your all. And sure, there's moments where you're stressed out because you got a high profile presentation or some such thing. But in general, you own your work and you're serious about it. And it doesn't matter if it's a tiny platform or a huge platform. And that goes to the point that John Pleasance was trying to make.
That's pretty cool. It's and right after that, you decided to leave Disney and then to start your own company. That is another interesting switch, I would imagine. One after one, and then leaping from one to another. Was that something that you always had in your mind that, okay, I'm going to jump into the hobby? Maybe you could share a little bit about that, your time after Disney, and then when you got into Amplify, coming back full circle to your musical career, so to speak. How was that?
Yeah. So what happened to me is I built a company, and then Disney acquired the company. And then it took me a while to find my way and my place at the Walt Disney Company. I came into it thinking oh, you sold your company and now you're vesting out. That's the Silicon Valley term, right? Where you sold your company and now you're at some other company. And then there's a general thinking that the company that bought you, that they're stuffy and boring and you're a genius entrepreneur and now you're just waiting to collect a check. That's sort of the attitude when people say earning out or vesting out. And it took me a little while to figure out, it was actually John that told me hey man, you're at Disney and all the company's asking you to do is to ship amazing products, right? I was like, wow, that's amazing, right? What a privilege and what an exciting opportunity. So it took me a while to figure that out and sort of center myself. And then when I left Disney, I felt like I wasn't learning and I wasn't growing and I wasn't adding that much. So that was a good time for me to leave. And what I realized was I would run into friends of mine that are professional investors and they're like, well, what's your next company going to be? Your next company is going to be $1 billion company. And I realized that wasn't interesting to me. This idea of your next company must be bigger as measured by dollars, value of the company or money that you make or others make, investors make, was not exciting to me. And so I said, I don't actually want to do that. I want to What do I want to do? Oh, I've always wanted to surf and make music and learn to play soccer. Why don't we do that? And so I realized that what I like about Silicon Valley and the entrepreneur community is that people work really hard and they're serious about their work. But what I don't like about it is this idea that you're not supposed to sleep and it's the only thing that matters. And you read the Steve Jobs book, and he sort of neglected his family for a long time and his
Oh
daughter.
yeah.
I don't want to be that. It's like, it's not that exciting to me to build stuff. I want to have balance in my life. It's like I started feeling like, oh, in Europe, that's a good thing. People have balance, right? So I said, well, I want to go do these other things, learn to surf and make music, because that's going to be more exciting to me than building a company that's bigger than the last one. And then I got bored and wanted to noodle on some projects. And out of that came this little company called The Hobby, where we built 3 or 4 apps, including Amplify, etc. None of those apps worked out. And I think one principal reason they didn't work out was that I wasn't committed enough. I didn't work hard enough. If you don't hire employees that had to quit other jobs and there's less pressure on you, which is nice, but now you're not as hungry. So I think one of the reasons that The Hobby failed is because it was a hobby, and I was trying to have it all. I was trying to surf and make music and be a CEO at the same time. I think it's very hard to build a successful startup company, and I think it takes a lot of energy, and everything needs to go right, that you can't really part-time it. I mean, maybe some person can, but I can't. So that was not a good setup for me to build something successful.
Yeah, but on the flip side, though, I would argue that it was rather successful, since you went with something that brought you happiness, right? You went with something that...
Yeah, the period in my life
Yeah.
was successful, right? I was able to learn all this new stuff. But the little company wasn't, right? We lost some money, etc. So as a startup, it wasn't. But sure, I own my choices and my decisions, right? So I rarely look back and wish I could do it all over again, and I wish I could do it different. Like, people sometimes ask me, I was like, not really, because I think as an entrepreneur, you have to be forward looking, and it's a thing Bob Iger at Disney used to say, you have to stop and look back and reflect on what you learned from the mistakes you've made. You have to do that sometimes, but most of the time you want to be looking forward and inventing the future, and not be too nervous about mistakes you've made before, because it can slow you down and stop you from being bold and trying out new things, etc. So I try not to spend too much time looking backwards, and there's not a lot of decisions that I really regret, because on the whole, I'm happy with the choices that I've made and where it's taken me in life.
That's great. And don't dwell on your past. Keep moving forward. I guess.
I mean, if you do something stupid, you should probably own up to it, right? And learn from mistakes, right? But don't be a prisoner to decisions that you made in the past, and have it stop you. I think one thing that happens to a lot of people, especially, it's a high-class problem to be successful and then go need to do something else, right? But one thing that I see a lot is people that have done something successful, and now you feel all this pressure to be even more successful. It's kind of like, you like, this is one of the reasons I really look up to Prince, right? You do Purple Rain, right? Which is like, and then everybody thinks now you need to do something even bigger. He just kept on making music. I think those are the kind of role models that I have, is like, can you use your success and have it set you free and allow you to keep doing the work you love doing, as opposed to become a prisoner of it and the expectations and feel like you need to do even bigger, and even that's when you start connecting the dots into the future, and it doesn't really work, So can we take our success as an opportunity to be free and to keep on noodling,
Yeah, it's pretty unsustainable too. Anyways, if you constantly want to become bigger and bigger and bigger, at what expense? At your health, at your life, at family time.
Well, you sort of look and you go like, everybody gets fired in the end, like literally, like every CEO, you end up getting fired. You're going to fail. And then you can either be nervous about that, or you can be accepting of the fact that you're not perfect, and that chapters come to an end,
True. And what do you do these days? Like, what's your daily life these days?
Sure.
I would imagine, especially pursuing in your journey of happiness and getting the things that you want done.
Yeah. Well, I try to make music at least 50 minutes every day. That's exciting. And then I'm back at Mozilla. I've been at Mozilla for about 6 months.
Tell me a little bit about that, about the startup. I had a brief go through about that, but please.
Well, I reconnected with Mitchell Baker, who's the CEO at Mozilla, and she asked me to come hang out and find new stuff to work on. And so I've been back at Mozilla for maybe it's already 9 months now, actually, and I'm working with a few other people. And we have a program called Mozilla Builders on our Slack. We have almost 3,000 people now, and we put out a call for ideas to computer science students all around the world back in the spring, and a very interesting group of people showed up with a bunch of really cool ideas. And out of that came a small incubator where we are investing a small amount of money in students and young entrepreneurs and other entrepreneurs to help them build projects and products and startups, and in some cases nonprofits that fix the internet. So basically, I'm looking for interesting people with ideas for products that can shape the internet for the better in the way that Firefox did when we launched it in 2004. That's my job now.
Interesting. For our viewers, I'll definitely leave a link down there so you can go up and read more about it, get into it. And I'm sure there's a lot of you who've asked about incubation. A lot of you have asked about how do you get into this. So be sure to check that out. Now, Bart, this is something that we've got a lot of fan questions on. It's nothing to do with your work, so to speak. It's more of your personal life. You travel a lot and you speak a lot of languages.
Yes.
So, without diving too much, would you mind if we switch gears a little bit, talk a little bit about your travels? Obviously, we can't travel right now, but you do speak 8 languages. Is that right?
Yeah, give or take, I lose a little bit track, and what I mean by that is they get stiff. Some of them are unfinished projects, 7 or 8, something like this.
Hmm. And is taking some time off to yourself and sort of looking back and reflecting something that you constantly do?
Yeah, I've always liked. It's not that different from the other conversation we were having about what turns you on, what gives you energy, what do you do, right? So I have this grand unified theory of energy, which is like the only thing that matters is energy. And what I mean by that is, as we go about our day, we do things, and some of them give us energy to want to do more, and others, they drain energy and they make us a little tired and they make us want to go watch TV or something. And we run into people, and some people give us energy and others make us a little tired. I've become really attuned to that, and I try to optimize my energy. So I try to, when I run into a person that gives me energy, then I try to spend more time with them. And so whereas when you start your day and you think logically about it, there are certain people that are important. I must connect with this person; they can help me, etc. Right? And I've tried to stop doing that as much, and instead ask myself, this person I just connected with, regardless of how they fit into my work day and into my plan, do they give me energy? And if they give me energy, spend more time with them because good stuff will happen. That's been one of the things I've been trying to do. Similarly, I've always enjoyed being in places that were new and different, and around people that are different from myself. So growing up in Belgium, I started off in a Catholic school. I ended up at the European school, spent my summers in Italy and Spain learning Spanish and Italian, and went to the French university. I'm Flemish, so I went to the French university, which is like the other side. I got used to the idea of being in the minority, being different, and I get energy from that because you meet interesting people and you learn new things. And I lived in Korea for a year and a half, and then as you learn the language, you start decoding the culture, right? And so you're like, oh, that's what's going on, and you notice all of the things that are different between other cultures, Belgian culture and California culture and Korean culture, and all the things that are the same. And so when you travel, when you learn a language, it's like learning to make music. You're connecting. There's connections going on in your head. It's interesting. So I like doing that.
And you don't give up, do you? You just keep going on one after another, regardless of how hard that is. I think at one time you started picking up Mandarin.
Yeah, well, there's this one thing that I started doing, sort of hacking. You spend a lot of your time hacking yourself, to do the things you want to do. And so one of the hacks that I have is like, oh, we have dogs here, right? And I don't like to, I'm so lazy, right? I think we're all lazy, right? It's like, oh, the dog bowl is empty. So now you got to like put water in the bowl, but I'm in a hurry always. And then the kitchen's over there and the bowl's over there. So then what I do is you pick up the empty bowl and you put it on the stairs, right? So now next time you step on the stairs, you're going to fall on it. So at that point, you might as well pick it up and put it in the sink. And once you get to the sink, you'll just put the water in. And so you create these hacks where you're hacking your own brain. So what happened with me with Mandarin is I had spent a year and a half in Korea and finally spoke some Korean. And my next startup, we had all this business in China. I was like, well, this kind of sucks because I can finally speak Korean and now I'm in Beijing and I don't understand anything people are saying. How different can it be? And relative to going from European languages to Korean, it's kind of an easier step to go from Korean to Chinese because the writing system, there's a bunch of words and you've already given up on the grammar rules from European languages anyway. So I kind of talked myself into just doing a little bit of Mandarin and then I did more of that, right? So Portuguese was the same thing. I was like, well, I speak Spanish and Italian and French. I'm going to watch the World Cup. How hard could it be to learn Portuguese? Kind of a mission of the streets. You spend 3 days. Once you've spent 3 days, you might want to go spend another 3 weeks, So sometimes I set these personal goals where I set up for myself to where I'm likely to keep doing it,
I think that's really inspiring. The fact that while most people would argue that you've already been in Silicon Valley, you know a couple of people, so that it might be a little bit easier for you to jump. But you're saying, hey, look, if I can do this, I can start from zero, then everyone else can too. I think that's really inspiring.
There's this thing that people say that you've probably picked up on called the beginner mindset.
Mm-hmm.
What I notice is like, so I'm doing an incubator. There are 1,000 incubators in Silicon Valley. So you run into all these people that are like, oh, you're doing an incubator. Here's the thing you're going to learn. And they tell you all of the bad stuff that's going to happen, and then they're going to fail. And then that's the jaded mindset, right? That's the expert mindset. And they tell you all the pros and cons and they tell you the end of the story. And then you don't want to do the work anymore. And so what I realized that the beginner mindset where you're like, ooh, I get to meet college students with bold ideas. You don't have to tell me that it's going to end badly. I'll figure that out for myself because the journey is the exciting part and learning and discovering new things is the exciting part. So maybe you become addicted to the journey of starting new things. And so maybe traveling or learning a new language, it's part of that same thing. Sometimes, there's a little bit of lazy to that, right? Because you're not making that longer term commitment to everything, right? So, so not all of that makes you a hero. Some of that makes you a little bit lazy and hooked on quick payoff of the relatively easy thing, right? But yeah, I enjoyed learning languages. I enjoyed traveling. You learn about new cultures and hopefully bring some of that back and you become a richer in the process,
Hopefully, absolutely. Especially when travel restrictions slowly start to lift.
I know, right?
Oh boy, I wanna bring this one question up. This is another popular question that we've had a lot from our young viewers. The usual standard is, programmers start learning Swift, start learning Python, a little bit technical here, start learning, simple programming languages, and then start developing their apps. Is that still a way to go, especially with a lot of things happening today? Do you still see things happening the traditional way, so to speak? Or would you rather argue for college graduates to build a brand first, something like how Disney has done, something else as how Apple has done, and then try to focus into the apps and programming world?
Yeah, there's many ways to build a successful company, and we all have to figure out what gives us energy, what are we good at, what work do we like to do, right? I personally, the things that give me energy and that inspire me and the people and the entrepreneurs that I want to be attached to and working with, I love people that build stuff. And so if you can code, that's the most direct way of being a builder. And if you can't code, I can't really code, that's okay, but then please be humble. Please find other people that can code, work with them. It's a bit of a Silicon Valley stereotype now, but in general, I prefer working with engineers over people with a business degree. There's a lot of amazing people that have an MBA or that majored in business, right? But what gives me energy is making stuff. And so what you want is people that want to make stuff, as opposed to talk about it or tell stories about it or give you a deck about it or give you just a vision. A vision is great, but can you go build that thing and make that vision come true?
Gotcha. Kind of like instead of saying and explaining, why don't you show me instead, right? Why don't you show me what you've done, and why don't you show me what you can do?
Yeah, we did. It's one of the things I'm trying to do at Mozilla is like never describe a thing, just build the thing. And so I remember when we first started on this Mozilla Builders Incubator thing, I was trying to show to Mitchell that we were going to, if we do this for a year, there'll be hundreds of projects that make the internet a better place, like a community thing. It's like, then we can make a website called fixtheinternet.go or something, right? And then I was talking to my designer, and we are going to make a little mock-up of that, right? And then we were like, well, why don't we just build that site? And literally in a day, we were using Bubble at the time. We were able to, instead of just making a screenshot, we were able to build the site. And I remember going into the meeting with Mitchell, and there was a screenshot of a thing called fixtheinternet.go, and then you could click on it, .us actually, and then you could click on it, and it worked. And you could leave comments, and you could upvote. She's like, holy shit, you built the whole thing. And what it does is it lets you imagine what it does, but when you engage with the world, people are like, oh, that person doesn't just talk, they do the thing. Everything that they show, you can click on it, it does something. And so it tells a story about what kind of person you are and what you're looking for. And so it gives you credibility and trust, if nothing else. But always ship something is probably a good rule.
Yeah, I totally agree. I quote myself. So sometimes instead of explaining to someone how things happen, I just show a little example, a little in-person kind of demonstration, and just watching their eyes go wide a little bit. That's enough happiness, I would say.
Well, the platforms are so great now, right? Whether it be no code or AWS, like
Yeah.
and then before there was the prototyping and the Figma and all that stuff, right? But it was like, used to be hard to build software. Now you can build something really fast. So why aren't you?
And anyone could do it. Yeah, you're not restricted in any way. Yeah.
And if you're not doing it, right, like a Bubble, right, or Airtable, right, like anybody can use that. So let's say that you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to get funding or you're trying to get me to work for you. Why would you give me a slideshow instead of an Airtable or a Bubble site that actually works, right? Like, what signal are you sending about your values and your priorities, right? And therefore, what kind of people are you going to attract?
That's really interesting, especially on the people that you'd attract based on the decisions that you make. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, another one interesting thing that this one is from me. It's not from the audience, but this one's from me. As I was looking through, reading up, there was something particularly interesting that really caught my eye, which was at your time in, I think it was in South Korea. You lived there for a year and a half. Here's the thing: to move into a particular place is already big enough, but to get assimilated to that culture, to as they say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. To be part of that, but at the same time to stay true to your core values can be naturally slightly difficult. Especially when tough decisions come into play. You're with your company and somebody wants to take a different decision, or you're struggling with a team where everybody wants to go a different way, and you have to pull them in, which may not necessarily be the right decision that you want to take, especially when it conflicts with your core values in building and developing. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is painting this picture of conflicts around how do you draw the line between sacrificing those core values that mean a lot to you and accommodating those that you don't really accept? Do you draw like a really hard line, or is that like a huge gray area? Maybe an example down there with that.
Well, sometimes you get it wrong, right? And so there's one value that's called being open to other cultures and be able to adapt and fit in, and accept. And then there's another value that's called being true to yourself and not being a fake and not changing yourself, right? And so sometimes sometimes you're like, oh, which of these two are these two values now competing with each other? And am I betraying one of these? And so, that's one of the things that happens in life, right? So sometimes we have competing values and they trade off against each other. And sometimes we're kidding ourselves, and you're saying that you're being flexible and open to other cultures, but you're actually abandoning core beliefs, right? Or sometimes you're using your core beliefs as an excuse for not being open and not listening and not being accepting of other cultures, right? So I would say, in my case, one of the risks that I'm at is that sometimes I'm too adaptable and sometimes I'm too influenced by the people around me. Like as I start speaking a different language, I pick up the mannerisms of the people around me. Even in English, I do it. I start sounding like the people I'm around. I pick up a dialect or an accent or something, and an attitude, like mirroring the person in front of me. It's how you learn a language. But every now and then, my friends are like, "Hey, you're now speaking different from normally because of the people that you're around." I was like, "Oh yeah, I do it on accident." So sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. So I think you have to find enough time in your life. Like, one of the things I try to do is a couple of times a week, you step away from your day-to-day grind and you ask yourself, I used to have this great conversation with my boss at Disney, at the St. John, and he would ask me, well, how many cylinders are you firing on? It's like a car metaphor, right? If you're firing on 5 cylinders, then you have a lot of power, right? If you're firing on one. And I would go like, well, I think and he didn't mean it as a literal question, but I would answer it literally. I would go like, well, I think we're firing on 2 cylinders. We're kind of stuck in a ditch. There's a little bit of mud here. And I'm, shit, how do I get out of this ditch and start feeling like I'm driving 40 miles an hour and then 50 and then 60, right? And I would ask. And so then after a while, I started asking myself the question as I'm driving home, am I thinking bold enough? Have I forgotten about why we are here? So I try to step back every day or every week and ask myself, am I doing all the right stuff? Is the day-to-day getting in the way of the important big picture stuff that I came here for? And I think as you're going about your life, you sort of have to find opportunities where you ask yourself, how am I doing? Like New Year's resolutions are a good vehicle. When I go surfing, I'm on the water and I'm just sort of feeling peaceful. Those are good times to sort of reflect on, like, am I doing what I need to be doing,
And like, while you're in the car and you're reflecting on all those kind of moments, say something does not feel right? Say something, that you got to change it, maybe lose a coworker, maybe lose a colleague, or maybe, space some things out. Is that something that you do it like in a flash, or does that take some processing? And
yeah, I used to do it in a flash. Now I don't.
can be pretty harsh, to make such rapid changes.
Yeah, like, one of your superpower when you're young is that you have the clarity and the crispness of doing bold stuff, right? And then sometimes it causes a lot of chaos, and sometimes you get it wrong, right? Like, half the time your decision is going to be wrong, So now when I have those moments of clarity, I sit on them, I write them down, and I don't really let them go. I'm not going to forget about them. I don't give up on them, but I do sit on them for a day, sometimes a week. Sometimes I decide to sit on it for a month. I sleep on them and I run them by people until I'm sure and that I've thought through the consequences, right? Like, if you're letting go a person, or if you're making a change and quitting your job, or you're folding a company, those have big effects downstream, right? And they have effects on other people all around you. So I do take more time than I used to. It's a function of getting older, I guess.
Well, you're definitely still a lot younger at heart. I really appreciate that. Really. But we are approaching towards our end of our time here. I want to be mindful of your time too. Just real quick, maybe I was hoping if I could slip one more question in before we head towards the end of the session. This is a little bit general towards our young entrepreneurs, our young audience members. If there was one thing that you could do differently, right, or something that that a lot of young people run into, especially when they start a business, what would that be? How would they navigate those rough waters? I'll give you some context. For instance, somebody who wants to start a business, but that may not necessarily be something that what they want to do, but they do it because it's cool. Or it could also be something that they're heavily invested in, but suddenly one day pops up and they just don't feel like doing it anymore. But it becomes really hard to leave because that was something that they started. So, uh, what are your take on this?
Yeah, for me, the biggest takeaway is one thing I learned about myself is that I can't do things alone. And so that would be my biggest takeaway, which is to say, whatever I'm doing, like I need to be really bought in. It needs to feel like it's something that I really care about. But at the same time, I've learned that I cannot do things alone. I don't enjoy it. I'm not good at it. I lose energy. I get demoralized. I'm not as resilient as I would like to be. Blah, 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 blah. And so, I mean, I just had the conversation with an entrepreneur this morning where I said, hey, you're going through the valley where it's hard and you've been trying all these things and they're not succeeding. And so I think you're a little demoralized. So what you now need to do is you need to come up with a 30-day plan. And then as you step in, and then you're going to be excited because you're going to have a 30-day plan. And then as you do the first day, it's not going to work because you're going to hit an obstacle. And then you're going to get tired and you're going to want to go watch TV or whatever it is that you do when you're tired of work. So I said to them, you need to go look at one of your team members or find another person that's your partner in this so that when you hit the wall, they're going to be there for you to get you through it like a coach or like a partner in crime and keep going. So I do think for me, that's the case. I think for most of us, it is hard to do things alone. And there's a lot of lure of the hero and the founder and the culture, certainly in America, sort of has a whole mythology around that, right? But I think most of us are more productive, have more fun, and have much better odds of success when we're not alone. So I think for most of us, you ought to ask yourself hard, should I be doing this thing alone? And how do I find the right person? And sometimes it means doing something a little different or making some serious compromises, right? But then you're not alone. And maybe you'll have more fun and more energy and you'll be able to make it through the hard times.
Very well said. Very well said. All right. So find someone, don't do everything alone, and never forget yourself. Cool. All right. So for our audience members joining us, listening in, very, very inspirational, very humble advice also from Bart here. I hope all of you have gained a lot of significant value. Hopefully that has answered quite a lot of your questions. Certainly did answer a lot of mine. And Bart, thank you so much. It's a privilege and honor. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Pushaga. That was fun.
Awesome. So for all of you, take care. And I will see you all in the next episode. Until then, take care. Have a great day.